Hello, welcome to Impersonal Opinion, the podcast where we don't take our opinions personally. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, Jamie Soden, and Jessica Gillette. And we are kind of going to talk about happiness because George and I, in our recent conversation, we'd been talking about how happier people will cause less suffering to others because happier people aren't as motivated to do crime, and it's when people are unhappy, when they're hurting, when they hurt others. So, George, what shall we do to increase our happiness?
All right, the first thing about happiness is to realize that it's really all we want. Think about anything we value in the world. Everything we value, other people, jobs, ambitions, our hobbies. Everything that we value because it makes us happier or happy. So that's the first thing. Once we understand that happiness is what we really want, then the next thing we realize, oh my God, we're spending years learning, let's say a second or third language, or learning math, or learning all this stuff, which might be interesting, might be useful in various ways, but it gets you thinking. It's like, we have a lot of time. Why don't we just learn how to become much, much happier? And then, we'll understand that really well, and that'll make the rest of our lives so much easier.
Yeah. So because happiness is really what we want, but people do all sorts of strange things to try to achieve happiness, and they keep thinking that certain things will make them happy. So how does a person how do they increase their happiness even though they can't change their circumstances? This is especially relevant for people like say that they're in prison, or say that there's some kind of child in an abusive family. Is there something that even those people can do?
Well, absolutely. For example, anyone can like go into the room someplace where there's quiet or no distractions, whatever, just sit down in a chair and just decide to get in touch with that feeling of happiness. Like, for example, let's say we were actors in a play or a movie, and our role, let's say the movie's about like some scientist who creates a happiness pill, right? And then he's testing it out on this one person who wants to like show the world how happy this one person is. So your role in this film is to play that person. You're going to be happy throughout the movie, whatever. And so basically what happens is you start smiling and you start kind of like quote unquote pretending to be happy, but it's more. You actually get in touch with the feeling of happiness. And we can all do that. We can all do that anytime we want. It's just the reason we don't is because like it's not really in our culture to do that. It's like it's a kind of like an unfamiliar strategy or concept, but it's with this the more we do it, it's like with meditation, like anything we do, the more we do it, the easier it becomes, and then it becomes more natural.
Yeah, and I really need to start practicing that idea, because really what happens is I'm just so busy, and there is a train whistle going on right now. That's annoying. But yeah, it just seems that there's always something happening. So I hardly ever get any alone time to focus on happiness. The only time I get any alone time is when my mom's out of the house. And so I don't know. I'm thinking what I can do to learn this.
Right. And also I want to hear from Jamie and Jessica. What do you guys think, our world needs to become much happier?
Uh, Jessica, you want to start that one off?
Thank you, Jamie. I found that very interesting, the idea of taking on the role in uncomfortable situations. I would like to, in the future, challenge myself to do so. After you said it, I imagined myself in an uncomfortable situation, and although I thought it was a very good idea and it would work some of the time, I don't think that it would work in every situation, as happiness is actually a reward system mechanism. I feel that, just based on my previous experience with discomfort and pain, that finding tranquility is an acceptance over the situation, and being able to separate yourself completely from your environment, unlike the reward system of joy or happiness, which would be based upon direct environmental stimuli.
Well, yeah, I agree. A lot of times we base our happiness on like, well, something happens and we evaluate it as advantageous, as good, as beneficial, and then we say to ourselves, well, that's going to make us happy because like the way we evaluate it. But we don't have to wait to do that. I think what you were saying, Jessica, is also is that like in a certain sense when we think back to when we were toddlers and infants and all, if things were all right, if nothing, again, this isn't going to happen this isn't, it isn't going to work all the time, like you said. I mean, like, it's not like, problems do come into our lives that distract us, and then it's really, really hard to focus on our happiness during those things. But like, for toddlers, it's their natural state to be happy. So you're right. When you talk about tranquility, becoming calm, what happens is when we meditate, when we detach ourselves from the world in a sense, or from all the what's wrong or whatever, then what happens is we become more relaxed. And see, happiness is a feeling. So like if we're like all tense and anxious and worried and preoccupied and all, our mind is in our head. We're living in our thoughts, and then we can't focus on the feelings. So to the extent we move away from our thoughts and become more tranquil, then that allows our natural happiness to emerge, so we can just like feel it more strongly.
That's a very good point.
So Jamie, what's your take?
Um, well, there's many things people can do to find an escape from reality. I mean, some people turn to drugs, some people turn to alcohol, but many of these things are extremely unhealthy, and um, they're just not a very wise thing to find happiness in. Instead, they should try and find things that are not so destructive to their health, but still, make them happy. Activities like going out for a walk or socializing with their friends. Um, these things generally make people happy, don't they?
Let me ask you guys something. I know that generally, it's best when our lives are as natural as they can be. But sometimes, for example, like if we have something wrong with us, a medical condition or whatever, we have like these medicines, these medical agents that heal us, that make us feel much better. So if they were to create, let's say, a happiness pill that didn't have, you know, serious negative side effects, that we would take, once each day in the morning, and the rest of our day, we might still have problems and all, but the rest of our day would go so much better, because like even though we'd have problems, we'd still be in touch with our happiness. Would this be a good idea?
I think it would be a great idea, if there was a happiness pill or something like that. Um, I mean, I still like the idea that people would be able to learn how to be happy without requiring that pill. But that's the thing, is there's got to be something that can be done. I'm all for whatever increases happiness. My only concern with the happiness pill is that would end up being some greedy capitalistic thing about somebody making billions of dollars because they have a monopoly on happiness pills. And
Right. No, no, Chandler, you're completely right. So with a happiness pill, you're right. It's like water. It's like, in other words, like everyone would be able to afford it. In other words, it should be free. Nobody should have to pay anything for it. Absolutely.
exactly, I would be afraid of it being like the pharmaceutical industry, where people are spending all their money on something.
Yeah. Another part of this is like, you make a good point. I mean, certainly happiness that comes naturally would be the ideal. But here's the thing. Let's say this pill was discovered tomorrow, and by next year, everybody on the planet, every adult on the planet at least, is taking it. So what happens, with that is like people who really have never really experienced great happiness, or just, having, all of a sudden they are like behaving like happy people, happy all the time. So what happens? Our kids, our infants, our toddlers, our young kids see a completely different world. Because right now, if they look on TV, the movies, newspapers, they see people like unhappy people writing unhappily, about unhappy things all the time. So we would create a different world, and like I would think it would be relatively um, guaranteed that like in a generation or two, because of like one generation or maybe two, using this happiness pill, that after that, people like, we'd create a world where we no longer need those pills.
That sounds brilliant. Yeah, because I mean, right now people are so unhappy that it's like we need a major intervention to change that. But I like the idea that we could eventually all learn to be happy and be a habit.
What do you guys think, kind of like limits or minimizes our happiness the most? What are we like up against the most?
The mating schema, darling. We need to.
What?
What? The mating schema? What?
I, I agree with Obama. He wanted to introduce sex education in kindergarten. And just explain it to the developing children when they're entering a environment that is away from their weirdo, like Orthodox families that will prohibit that. Sex education and just in, instilling and ingraining the understanding that sex is for reproduction. It's all for fucking babies. And we're all fighting over it. The whole organism is separated into two, for Christ's sake. We're man versus woman versus woman, man versus man, and let's not even talk about the gays. Thank God for them, right? Physical procreation.
So, Jessica, what you're saying is that people's concern over sexuality, sexual attraction, mating, marriage, sex, all those things are severely limiting our happiness and they're kind of wasting our lives away.
Well,
um,
there's a lot of consequences. I mean, there's sexually transmitted diseases for a start.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a point to what Jessica said there because here's the deal. Look at how many people get really, really happy when when they have some partner, and then as soon as they break up with them or they die or something, then they get sent into a depression, even to the point of being suicidal. So yeah, I mean, I think that that is a major disruptor of our happiness.
Yeah, and actually, there is a gender component. Jessica might have been suggesting this. Like, according to the research, they ask men and women the same question: what is the happiest time of your day, right? Or not every day, whatever, but like now, women will say sex, sexual intimacy. That they define that as happiest. Guys will say, well, watching the Mets, watching closing a deal at work and all. So I think yes, I think to properly understood, sex isn't just about the act and the orgasm and all that stuff. It's also about the emotions, the connection, the intimacy. And I think you're right. I think to the extent that they teach that to young kids, then one of the problems today is like, I mean, you see, in the movies and TV and stuff, sex is everywhere. And what happens is like, think about like life a few hundred years ago, where they didn't have the mass media. So I'm not sure sex was on people's mind all that much. So, but it didn't like create this kind of like, I think a lot of people walk around frustrated because they see sex everywhere, but I'm not sure everybody's having sex all the time. So it creates a frustration. So, but yeah, the more important point is that I don't think because of the religious prohibitions about the puritanical attitudes and stuff, I don't think we understand sex very much. So to the extent we understand it more, we can control it. We don't have to be kind of like promiscuous and like just have multiple partners with all the risks that involve. I mean, we could learn to just like use our sexuality in a very wise way to make us much happier.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. This kind of stuff is in your face everywhere, which is a big part of the reason why, I don't watch TV hardly ever. Actually, I haven't watched regular TV in years. But everywhere you go, it does seem that, like, if you even check your spam email, which once in a great while I'll do, it seems that everything is it's either related to sexuality or it's related to food. It seems like there's two things that everybody's trying to sell us. It's either how to have more sex or how to lose weight. It seems like those two things are the big issue that's promoted.
Hmm.
So what else? What else you guys think? Kind of like, limits our happiness. What should we be understanding more or overcoming so that we can just, be happier more each day and be happier every day?
Well, Chandler has said something along the lines of uh, sex being bad or something. I mean, Chandler, what did you say that was bad about it?
Well, it causes this emotion triumphs over reason, where people they have feelings which completely rob them of all conscious thought. And I find that to be very disturbing and makes people irrational.
I think the other thing, let's say you're watching TV, right? And let's like we'll move just right from sex to food for a minute. And what happens is like there's a lot of overweight. What, 2/3 of Americans are overweight, whatever. And let's say they're not hungry, right? Let's say they ate a good meal, they're watching TV. All of a sudden you get three, four, five, six, seven food commercials. And all of a sudden they weren't hungry before, but now because of the commercials, they're hungry, so they go and eat some more. Or maybe there's, they don't eat, but they're hungry, so their feelings frustrated. And I think the same thing with sex is like, we have a natural kind of like desire for sex, just a natural predisposition to seek it and all. We don't need these additional inputs, just like we don't need additional inputs to make us hungry.
Yeah. So what you're saying is when these things are presented to it, it affects us and makes us want something, even if we weren't wanting it to begin with at that time.
Yeah, and the problem with that is like then it objectifies people. It's like all of a sudden, like before all these sexual commercials and movies and stuff, people wanted to be with people, for the sex partly, but also mainly because of the other people, the people's qualities, the people who were attracted to people. Whereas because like now with all the sex in the media, a lot of times, especially guys will go out into the world, not necessarily looking for people to connect with, but more so looking for sex. It just like it actually pulls people apart in that way.
Yeah, because I've heard of like sex addiction. What's it? Sex and porn addictions ruining people's lives. There was case stories where even adults have had addictions to porn or whatever. There was some news article when they're Chandler.
There probably was. I don't pay attention to news stuff very much at all.
No, I think I heard something about it years ago. But there's all sorts of addictions that people want to get over because the problem with addiction is it interferes of what you would do otherwise if you weren't addicted, doesn't it?
Yeah. 'Cause it does seem that, I mean, addiction is kind of a little bit hard to define, but I think something's an addiction when somebody, even if they want to stop it because they know it's interfering with their life in some way, they're still unable to. I mean, that's a powerful example of how we don't have free will, that we're unable to just simply stop addictions. Um,
And we could even think that we're actually addicted to our negative thoughts,
Yeah,
our
I wonder
unpleasant
if that's
thoughts.
true. Like, I wonder if in some way that I'm addicted to even the negative thoughts about, all the problems in the world because I focus on it so much that I'm wondering if it's at this point there's something I'm getting out of it, even though it doesn't feel pleasant.
You guys ever see, this was like years ago, a Seinfeld episode where George Costanza's like, every time he sees his boss walk by, he starts like grumbling and appears very frustrated, showing this guy that he's feeling a lot of pain. And the boss, as a result, thinks that he's working really, really hard. I think that applies to all of us. I think a lot of times we think that, like, if we're not going, it's like this no pain, no gain philosophy. A lot of people think, oh my God, if I'm not feeling in pain, I must be doing something wrong.
Huh. That's an interesting idea, like as if that they're accomplishing something by feeling pain.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but George, you did make a good point about this sex thing objectifies people, and then people get the wrong idea about sex. Uh, Normally, it's supposed to be about two adults sharing a relationship with one another, but when it becomes about just sex only, then it gets a little twisted.
You know
I'm,
what?
I'm
We're
Go on.
talking about happiness, and a lot of times when I lead my happiness meetup groups, you know, a lot of times it's important. It's good to know exactly what we mean by happiness. So why don't we go around and just like define what happiness means to us?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So, who should start?
Um, does Jessica want to start?
Oh, so just to recap, I was off getting uh, tea and water for my cat. Um, we're talking about how to encourage happiness in a group.
Yeah, but right now we're talking about how do we define happiness? Like, what does happiness mean to you?
I guess it's different combinations of certain like what is it, a neurotransmitter or just different chemicals, which is a reward system for health, going up in the mating schema.
Yeah, well, Jessica, you're defining the physiochemistry of it, but like, can you describe it more as an experience?
um, it's like a drug. Happiness is a drug. Love is a drug. I mean, basically because everything. I mean, it's a feel. It's a feeling, I guess. I mean, it's a physical sensation that could be comparable to a drug, like love. Because it's just a physiological reaction.
Okay,
Well,
Jamie.
okay, here's how I think of happiness. I think of happiness, something gives you pleasure. There's something that you like doing, whether that's listening to music or playing a certain game or eating a certain food. I think of there's something that you like doing, and I tend to equate happiness with certain activities. So yeah, I think that you can look at what a person spends their time doing and you realize that that's probably for them their source of happiness.
Okay, absolutely. Now, I would define happiness as like, here's the thing, like, yeah, we're biologically hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And so happiness is a kind of pleasure. Happiness, like, it's like, um, well, according to the science, to the psychology, happiness has three components. One is basically feeling good feelings, just how it feels when we feel good as opposed to being in a bad mood or something. We just feel good, right? So the other component of happiness that relates to emotions is to not feel bad, right? I mean, this is really simple. It's much more simple than most people realize. The last component is generally being satisfied with the way things are. That's kind of like more of a cognitive kind of thing. But happiness really isn't any more complicated than just feeling good.
Yeah, I think we know what it's like to feel good in general because here's how you do it. What I think you figure it out by what would you rather be doing? Something makes you feel better than something else. Um, and so I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to describe a feeling, isn't it? Isn't it? It's kind of it's easier to describe some object that you can see. It's easier to describe causality or other things. But when it comes to this happiness thing, it's like something just feels good, but good is, it's hard to define a feeling. It's hard to put something into words, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's an experience that you just have to know. You have to have something that makes you happy.
And a lot of times again, happiness is like can be defined by what it's not. You know, when we're not preoccupied or distracted by our worries or being angry at things and frustrated and all that, then I think, you know, the happiness just naturally merges by our feeling all right, like nothing's wrong.
Huh. Yeah. I find that, because I'm aware of what's wrong in the world, I guess that has a tendency to decrease my happiness because, when I was a kid, there were times when I simply wasn't aware of all the problems that are in the world because I didn't know anything. And so I'm trying to get back to the type of happiness I had when I was a kid.
Well, let's talk
I
about
see.
that. Let's talk about like, you know, either being aware of the world's problems and not allowing that to impinge on our happiness, or, you know, to choose to not watch the news, to choose to not really be aware of so much that we don't really have control over, and that way not be distracted by all that.
Yeah, because I think part of the problem is that somehow even though I know I don't have a free will, I know really nothing's up to me, I still feel like that somehow by being aware of something that's somehow going to change things. And honestly, that makes about as much sense as the people who think that them watching a sports game on TV affects which team wins.
Yeah, and let's say that was right. Let's say, for example, with climate change, you know, the more you're aware of it, the more it increases the likelihood of it being addressed. But yeah, you're right. The problem with that also is that, like, you know, if many more people are not aware or just like don't believe it's happening, then they're going to have an influence also in the opposite direction.
Yeah, so that's what's a little bit frustrating because on one hand, me being aware of a certain thing, that's allowed me to, go vegan, for example. But um, it's true that I understand that even if I were to have never existed, let's say I never existed at all, well, then the rest of the world will still make climate change continue until we're all wiped out. So I realize that that's something that's, in a sense, the way I feel about climate change and certain other issues is it feels like fatalism because my actions really don't make any difference. It's gonna happen because other people are doing things and I can't stop them.
Yeah, I hear you. So that's again, that's where the serenity prayer comes in. I mean, like, you know, the serenity to accept the things we can't change, because it just doesn't make sense to to allow those things we can't change to keep us from really the only thing we want in our reality. I mean, I'm not saying we don't value other things, but you know, fundamentally, we value everything because it makes us happy.
Yeah, so I don't know. That's something I still need to think about is realizing that there are certain things I can't do, and so it's not even good to think about them necessarily. One thing is, when you're trying to do something, but then you're getting distracted and thinking about other things that are completely unrelated, and I find that to be troublesome. I'll be stacking groceries, but then I'll get all upset because the customers are buying, meat, dairy, and eggs, and then I think about all the animal cruelty, so then I get really depressed, and and that's a difficult thing. That's probably the biggest trouble that I face, lately.
Well, all right. So let's. I mean, I yeah. When I actually sometimes I'll avoid walking by the meat side of the supermarket because of that and all. But let's. A lot of happiness is about spinning things positively. So I mean, one way is like minimize the negative. For example, yeah, these animals, like a chicken, I think today might live about 7 weeks. So it's suffering 7 weeks. And here's where, I mean, like, we have different perspectives about reality. And like, one perspective is to believe that, like, we're alive, and then, like, before we were alive we didn't exist, and after we are alive we don't exist again. So from that perspective, yeah, these animals are suffering, but relative to this expanse of eternity that goes gazillion years into the past and a gazillion years into the future, then fortunately that suffering is, relatively speaking, very short lived. And if you believe in, like, I actually believe in heaven, not because I have any proof of it, but just because it makes me feel good. So then I think, well, all right, let's say if these animals that are suffering have souls, all right, they may, be suffering and for weeks, or maybe with pigs for months and all, but then it's over, and they, then ideally they can go on to bliss. So, a lot of it is just like spinning our reality in a way that kind of like minimizes the suffering of it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I mean I feel like to me like that would be almost like deceiving myself in some way.
But you actually get depressed when people buy meat and eggs, Chandler, like when you have to cash it in for the register.
Yeah, see, because I since I have to stock groceries, I see everything everyone's buying, and I realize that, you know, from both the animal cruelty and the climate change aspect, there's nothing I can do to stop them all.
Yeah, but what can you do, eh? I mean, it's happened. Um, you have to try and find ways to make yourself happy, you know?
Yeah, so that's I would say that's one of the biggest things I have to figure out how to do because I get really down about it sometimes.
Well,
And
sometimes I don't like to let the bad guys win. If somebody's doing something wrong, you know, it seems like if they get to me, if they diminish my happiness, they've won. And I don't like to give people who do things wrong that kind of power over me. Chandler, you might want to consider that like, to the extent you can overcome your tendency to feel bad about it, then yeah, I mean, like, you know at least they're not getting to you. At least, what other people do that's wrong, you're not allowing them that power over you.
yeah, that's the difficult thing. And what the truth of it is I'm kind of a wimp. I'm just like a pushover, and other people win, they're mean, and I just get scared away.
Well, I don't think you're a wimp. I think, like, you in the past you've kind of like fought for what's right and stuff. And I, like, with me, a lot of times it's not that we're wimps. It's that, like, we recognize, like, if we would, like, go to battle with them, chances are they would be clueless in terms of what it's all about, and we wouldn't really be able to, like, explain it to them. They wouldn't understand. So we kind of like we realize we're up against a difficult situation that we don't have much influence over, so it just doesn't make sense to just aggress against them, right? But it does make sense to not let them get to us.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. It's sort of like, how just like we've been trying to tell Jamie about how arguing with these people on YouTube isn't really going to help all that much, because it's like the negative effects to Jamie or I if we end up getting involved in these arguments online, that causes us negativity. We know that, but it seems to have no positive benefit that we have evidence of. So it's like, why do it if it's all bad and no good?
Exactly.
Yeah, just like when you were arguing with that person on YouTube about the whole Jack McClellan thing. Um, she gave you accusations and stuff like that, and called you a retard or something, and you ended up getting frustrated, and then you just blocked her, didn't you?
Yeah, I just blocked her. There was no point in continuing to get notifications in my email when she said something stupid. So
Yeah,
And
because I mean, just because we're saying that this guy can't help the fact that he's mentally ill doesn't mean that we're saying that he should be allowed to, rape kids or whatever. for the time being, as far as we're aware, he hasn't done anything. But if he does do something, then obviously they need to take action and, you know, put him in a position where he can't do it again, either by jail, mental asylum, whatever, you know. But you know, people get irrational and blame people for things that they simply cannot help. It's just it's unfortunate, man, and it frustrates me when people get blamed. It's not just his situation, man. Other people with mental illnesses too. You know, like schizophrenics and bipolar people. So, sometimes um, people just don't want to know their problems. They don't care about them. They make them homeless or whatever. Or in the case of you know that artist who was the animator of that cartoon show called Ned Neddy. This guy was diagnosed with bipolar disorder apparently, and he was shot even though he wasn't armed. He apparently got violent or something. He had some sort of violent outburst, but he didn't have any weapons on him. You see, so what happened was the police just shot him execution style, even though he was on his knees. And I'm thinking that's police brutality right there. You're basically killing him just because he acted violently out of the fact that he was mentally ill. He wasn't stable. He needed some help. You know what I mean? It's obvious, you know, that he just wasn't in his right mind at the time. But they should, instead of handcuffing him like they should have done, they they just shot him in the head. And you know, I would say that's murder. You know, but as far as I'm aware, uh, the police weren't arrested for that. They weren't jailed for that. And it's really heartbreaking when you hear stories of police brutality, isn't it, George?
It is, but Jamie, here's the thing. Just like, for example, Chandler blocked this person who just wasn't getting it, who was just like, you know, saying things that were upsetting and stuff. This happens with our thoughts. For
Yeah,
example, you're right. When you think about like police brutality in the world, when you think that like, 30,000 kids under the age of 5 are dying every day of preventable poverty, poverty that doesn't have to exist. With animals, like there's so much in the world that could just like cause us pain every time we think about it. And again, like, if thinking about it, leads to a solution, then we might want to think about it in a certain way. But to the extent it doesn't, it just makes sense. Like, like just like you can block people, we can block our thoughts. And it, it's not like it's like we can do that automatically. It takes practice, but we can get better and better at whenever these negative thoughts, come into our mind. We ask ourselves, wait a minute, is this helping? Is this helping me? Is this helping the world? Then like if we say that it's not, then we could choose to just let me think of something more positive, and that way when I'm around people I can help make them happier, and rather than just like making the world more unhappy by our becoming more unhappy with these thoughts, we can just choose to just like focus on making the world happier.
yeah. I mean, it is unfortunate that there's these kids and all that starving and dying of diseases and whatnot in slums in third world countries. But we've also got like immense problems in our countries as well. I mean, you get teenagers who are bullied for being gay, for goodness sake, and they end up like becoming suicidal because they're getting bullied for whatever it might be. And it's really disgusting how some people treat each other, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. So here's the deal, George. Now, what you're saying is like, we need to find a way to block these things from the social networks of our heads in a way.
Yeah, for example, let's say, imagine you're with somebody and like, this person like trails you like everywhere where you go. He trails you to work, he trails you when you go back home. He's like with you all the time, right? And this guy, let's say he's always lying, right? He's not even telling the truth, but he's telling you all these things that are wrong with you, or whatever. And like, imagine, and I don't think it's difficult to imagine that even though this person is not telling you the truth, that's going to be bothersome. Just this guy telling you all these things that are wrong. Now, reverse that and imagine a different guy who trails you, again, everywhere. And this guy isn't telling the truth either, but he happens to be telling you, everything that's right with you. And so, like, even though it's not the truth, you're probably going to feel pretty good because, like, all these positive images are coming. So the idea is like, and I'm not saying we have to resort to like untruth with this, but the idea is like, we can do this with ourselves. We can kind of like, get better and better at both cultivating the habit of having positive thoughts, and just equally importantly, when these thoughts come from who knows where, because who knows where they come from, it's not like we're inviting them. When these unpleasant thoughts come into our mind, we can just get better and better at noticing, wait a minute, I don't have to think this. I can just choose to think about something more pleasant.
Yeah, you do need escapism. That's the word for it. Like when things on the news or on the internet are so depressing that you just don't want to talk about it anymore. You have to try and pull yourself away from it.
Exactly. And I'm not even sure it's escapism per se, because that kind of has somewhat of a negative connotation in a way. It's just like the wisdom of like accentuating the positive, seeing the good side of life.
Yeah. There was this film called Life of Brian, I think it was called. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know what he's getting at. Always look on the bright side of life.
Monty Python, oh yeah.
Yeah, that movie was hilarious.
Fun of the Jews, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I don't know. That was such a bizarre movie, but yeah, I get the message because that's basically what George is saying. Look at the positive things in life. I mean, it's kind of weird because here's the deal. Now, we know that it's not easy. It's not like somebody can effortlessly just, block certain thoughts. I mean, because you'd have to have like a free will to really be able to think what you want to think and feel what you want to feel all the time, and you'd be immune to things. And so we're not immune to things, obviously, in that sense, but there's got to be a way that we can still um, focus more on the positive and not get so down about all the negative.
Of course.
Well, the way, Chandler, is practice. Like, like you sit down, right? And like, I mean, this is actually why meditation's sometimes good. I haven't done this all that much myself, but it seems to make sense. Basically, you're sitting down and you're kind of noticing your thoughts, right? And some of the thoughts are going to be pleasant, other thoughts are unpleasant. And I think it's just getting better and better at noticing that. If your thoughts are pleasant, you want to continue them. Nothing's wrong, whatever. You just like feel the pleasant thought, think it, whatever, nothing's wrong. But then when you notice that your mind is going to something unpleasant, then maybe just, Chandler, I guess, in terms of what to do, you might want to question, why is your mind going to that? Is it beneficial that it's going there? Then the next part would be like, saying, well, let's say you conclude that it's not beneficial, it's not necessary, then just by an act of will, you're right, we don't have free will, but just like through the force of intention, we just said, well, I'm going to just go back to thinking about, try to remember the last positive thing you thought and go back to it and all. So like, it's just something that basically what I'm trying to say is like, it's something like with anything, with talking, riding a bicycle, playing an instrument and stuff. The more we practice, the better and better we're going to get at it.
Yeah, and I guess I've never really practiced that, and so there's got to be a way whenever I know that I'm gonna have time to be alone, which rarely ever happens, to find a way to focus on happy thoughts somehow.
Hey mom, I'm escaping, so don't go in front of
Yeah,
Yeah.
Chandler, one of the ways that
Too
you
early.
find a way to escape from reality is um, you remember the things you did when you was a child, right?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I of course I played a lot of video games and stuff, and I used to play in the mud and with sticks outside and stuff like that too. But yeah, I mean, even today, I mean, I like to get on Steam and play some games and stuff. That's the kind of thing I like to do.
Mm.
Um,
That's the kind of thing me and Anthony do. Whenever Anthony gets on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox or PC, I'll play something with him to pass the time, whether it be Destiny or Minecraft or whatever. Uh, I like playing with people like WC because it's one of our like times where we get to talk about things that make us happy. You know.
Yeah, Jessica, what do you do that makes you happy?
My to be completely honest with you guys,
Did she just drop from the call?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. She was about to say something.
Yeah. Jessica, you still there?
Yeah, I don't know.
Skype's been doing that.
Okay, I'm gonna add her back to the group call.
sorry.
Yeah, what were you about to say?
Oh,
Yeah,
uh, talking to Chandler. Funny enough, I don't get a lot of real life interaction and or looking at Chandler.
yeah,
Well, that's not true, I guess. Oh.
yeah. Well, that's what's funny is that Jessica really likes talking to me. So that I guess that's what makes her happy is she calls me or we'll talk on Skype. Although it consists of her mostly just staring at me and not a lot gets said. So I guess I'm like the one of the causes of Jessica's happiness. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's like for most people, other people are our main source of happiness. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of a weird thing to me because I'm actually, I don't know, I guess I'm not as much that way. I find human interaction kind of exhausting,
I,
but
yeah, I think Jessica's a good influence on you in that way because you're probably like, yeah, with a lot of guys, like, we focus on concepts and ideas and stuff way too much. I think, it's good to focus on other people and feelings and connection.
yeah. Most of my interaction comes from, the podcast, talking to Jessica or something. And I find that to be better than, because the only interaction I get with customers at Hy-Vee is like paper or plastic or someone telling me to take something back to the shelf or get an extra one of this or replace the cracked eggs. And I don't find that appealing at all. I mean, that gets really old after a while. But yeah, I guess a lot of people, the very fact that people, look at the things people do, look how they go around dating people, trying to find their special person, or they go to church, or they go to some clubs, or, you look at how people crave social activity so much, and that does lead to the idea that they get their happiness from being around other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a weird thought, but yeah, I'm that's kind of what I want to. I want to focus on what am I feeling, why am I feeling it, and sort of just examine my own thoughts and my level of happiness. Because if I figure out how to be happy, that'll just improve everything I do.
Exactly. That's one of the things, like if you look on my Happy to Show website, there's a page where I list all the benefits of happiness. In other words, happiness isn't just the end product of everything we do, it's a means to, in other words, happier people make more money, they're more creative, they're healthier, they marry more, they divorce less. There's so many benefits from becoming happier.
Yeah.
Yeah, because apparently
So
there's
it's
a lot of serious medical health problems that can arise from depression, isn't there? Like it can affect your immune system, kind of, George.
Absolutely, absolutely. The happier a person is, the healthier they'll be because of that. The immune system works much better when a person's happy.
Yeah, so that's something that needs to be priority. I mean, I'm starting to see why that's the benefit and why we talk about happiness because if we're not happy, then it kind of just, well, what's the point of life?
Exactly, and one of the big mysteries of this world is why don't people get that? I mean, like happiness, like fine, we got to learn how to read and write and all that stuff, but I mean, K through 12, the number one subject in school should be happiness. because like that's the number one goal in life.
Yeah, and for many people, they don't see it that way. They think that their goal in life is to do something else. I don't know what it is, but like people have this idea like that you go through the cycle. Like here's what it appears. People have this idea, well, you go to school, you go through regular school, and then you go to college, and then when you're 21 you get drunk, and then you get married and you have kids and you work a job the rest of your life, and then you retire, and then you just die. And like that's the way most of human society looks to me. It looks like there's this set pattern of stages of life, that at this age everyone does this, and that looks very boring. That's not me at all.
Yeah, one of the problems is like, we're not very good at predicting what's going to make us happier. Like the number one, like when people are asked, what's going to make you happier? The number one answer is always like, well, if I had more money. But actually, according to the research, having more money, above the poverty line, because like, it's good to have our basic needs met. But, you know, after that, having more money has a very, very, very small effect on people's happiness. So what happens is, yeah, people like spend, same as like with advanced degrees. A person with a bachelor's or a high school degree says, well, if I get a master's or a PhD, I'm going to be happier. No, according to the research, that's not the case. Or if I get a certain job and then get a promotion, I'm going to be happier. In instance after instance, we devote so much time and effort to these things that don't make us happy, whereas like some things do, like having a lot of good friends makes you happy, a close, a relationship, a spouse, getting married. Some things work, but many, many other things don't.
Of course, and being rich doesn't necessarily make you happy. I mean, Elliot Rodger was a prime example of that. I mean, he was very unhappy, but he was from a very wealthy family. I mean, his father was a director, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. 38%, 37% of people on Forbes' list of wealthiest Americans are actually less happy than the average American. So that'll tell you everything.
Yeah, it's a weird thought that you see people who have lots of money. You see people who have food. You see people who have relationships. You see this, but these people are still depressed often, and sometimes they kill themselves, which that's powerful to show us that those certain things don't make a type of indestructible happiness.
Or sometimes they become completely psychotic and become mass murderers. You know, like I said with that individual I mentioned earlier, um, he just went completely off the rails, and this was despite the fact that he had so much money, and I think he exaggerated the part where he wasn't very popular because he did have some friends. I mean, there were some people who knew him that were interviewed. They actually came out and said that they were friends with this guy. So I'm thinking he was lying about that too, George.
Hmm.
You know,
Maybe
I
he
mean,
didn't know who his friends were.
yeah, but if he wasn't very popular, and now comes these people knew him. I mean, they didn't seem to have any negative feelings towards him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That actually, and like while we're talking about happiness, like we can talk about the free will thing. In other words, with his case, with Elliot Rodger and all, basically people maybe didn't like him, whatever, because they were kind of like, let's say Elliot Rodger had certain negative characteristics or personality traits or something. So people
Yeah.
blamed him for that, And like with a lot of these mass murders and stuff, that's what happens. People pick on them, bully them because like they feel like, well, they deserve it because they're not conventional. They're not like other, so like they're doing something wrong. And this is a free will thing, like they're blaming them because of the free will. And then in retaliation, this person says, well, I'm going to get them back because like they're evil because they have a free will and doing what's wrong. So free will
Mm,
belief, I mean, like not only limits our happiness, it just creates so much unnecessary suffering.
of course, yeah. It's a difficult one to judge. I mean, on the one hand, he may have been very smug towards his people that you know that he said he was going to get payback on because he was blaming them for stuff that he thinks that they've done wrong. But on the other hand, I mean, he's not perfect. Okay, we can all see. He must have done some things for them as well. But the problem is, George, because of blaming each other, it just never stops, does it? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I would think like in 50 years, hopefully everybody overcomes this free will delusion. Nobody will have any rational reason to blame anyone, including themselves, for anything. That's got to be a much better world.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm hoping that we find a way to make a happier world. I mean, it's been a good talk about, happiness and what makes us happy, what messes up our happiness.
I agree with George's point about being above the poverty line. There's a certain income bracket where money just doesn't make you happier. I do see his point there.
Yeah, I mean, right now, part of the problem is there are so many people who are so poor that they don't have a place to live. They don't have food and water. And so those people, the sad news is I don't think they can be happy. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's people who have had everything handed to them through inheritance, right? And then they just, um, I don't seem to recall very many of them being that happy with themselves. I mean, there's an old stereotype going around saying that rich people are jerks and stuff, right?
Maybe they're jerks because they're unhappy.
Well, yeah, there's sayings like power corrupts and money corrupts, and it's true. When people become powerful, they, become less compassionate. The same becomes true a lot of
Socially,
times when people become richer.
yeah, a lot of rich people are very less, they're less empathetic than the average person is because they tend to look down on the poor and blame them for their situation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another free will thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it always ends up relating to the free will thing in some way because that's just such a common problem. and and I don't know, this feeling of blame, like, it doesn't actually help people feel happier. Feeling like you're to blame, it's your fault or it's somebody else's fault, that doesn't actually make people happier.
Exactly.
And so that's why I think that it's better for us all to overcome that illusion of free will. And that's what people just don't get. They just don't see how it will actually make them happier. They think that that will make life meaningless. And I'm like, well, I have a slightly different approach. Is that, well, maybe life is meaningless, but you're still better off if you're not blaming yourself for your meaningless life.
Yeah, well, the question of meaning in life, it really, boils down to actually what you mean by meaning. Because like if you're asking what the meaning of, let's say, the universe and the world is, who knows, right? Because it's not our meaning. I mean, we're just the puppets. We're not the puppeteer. So like, but if you're asking for what our meaning in life, again, like they ask, thousands and thousands of people, what's the most meaningful thing in your life? And the number one answer is always happiness.
Yeah, that's the thing, is there is a difference between an overall meaning of the universe, which people try to talk about, and just our meaning, what makes us happy. And I really think that our meaning is whatever makes us happy. So there's not a meaning, there's infinite meanings.
That makes sense too. Cool.
If people got over this free will illusion stuff, right, do you think in the far distant future everyone would have the same amount of resources? Like, would there be like shared resources or resource-based economy, as David Joseph put it?
Yeah, Peter Joseph. I think, yeah, he's on to something. I think in the future, a lot of this ownership would just not be useful or necessary. People will have pretty much like, what they need. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if we ever hope to live on other planets, right? We've got to start thinking about worrying about the problems that we've got here first.
Yeah, yeah, I think the future might be happier in general as people overcome this free will belief and as they learn how to meditate on happiness. So that's something that I want to work on more. We've been talking for an hour now, so do you suppose we should wrap up this episode?
Definitely. Yep.
Okay, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, Jamie Soden, and Jessica Gillette. And we've talked about, how happiness is what it's really all about, and what makes us happy, what stops us from being happy, how can we work on it, and all those sort of things. But yeah, it's something that we'll continue to revisit because happiness is kind of what we all want. So I hope you've learned something by listening to this. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.